I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that I think the parable of the prodigal son is a bad title. And I feel confident saying that because it's not actually in the Bible. Like, those chapter headings in the Bible aren't really a part of the Bible. And so it's not like Jesus named it that. And it was probably named that by some guy who lived a couple hundred of years ago and didn't even own a toothbrush. And so frankly, I don't really trust him all that much. But I think the parable of the prodigal son is a bad title because I think if anybody in the parable is truly prodigal, it's the father. That the father is the one who literally just gives away everything that he has insensibly, right? His younger son goes to him and basically says the rudest thing you could say in an ancient Hebrew home. Says, "Father, I essentially wish that you were dead, and I would like you to give me what's mine, and I'm going to head out." Right? And the father says, "You know what? That's a good idea. Let me give you half of what I own." Right? The father is crazy prodigal. And this son, who insults his father, wishes him dead, goes off and wastes all the money, comes home, and the father once again is prodigal. The father says, put the finest robe on him, give him the ring, everything, slaughter the fattened calf, give him everything he wants. And then the elder son throws a temper tantrum. He's outside, and he says, you never give me anything. And the father says, well, everything I have is yours, right? Just take it. Everything I have is yours. Right? The father is crazy prodigal. And if the son is prodigal, it's only because he learned it from his father, right? The irony of the parable is that the prodigal son is a distorted image of his father, right? That his father is tremendously generous to his sons. He gives them everything they could possibly want. And the son goes off and acts like his father, but in a distorted way, right? Just in the way that sin distorts our nature, right? We're doing something good, but at the wrong time, or in the wrong way, or in the wrong proportion. There's a distortion, right? The prodigal son is a distorted image of his prodigal father, who gives everything to his sons at every moment that they possibly ask him for. And the tragedy of the parable is that at no point in the parable, even at the end, the tragedy is that neither of the sons truly understand their father's heart. Right? That their father loves them, rejoices in them, and just simply gives them everything that he has. And yet at every turn, the sons are constantly bargaining, and they're rationalizing, and they're trying to think of how they can earn their father's goods, how they can earn their father's gifts, when their father's heart is simply just to give them everything that he has, right? The great tragedy is that neither of the sons truly understand how prodigal their father really is. Think of this younger son, that even when he returns, it's not out of love, it's not even really out of repentance so much. It's that the younger son is starving, and he thinks, well, my dad has food, I can at least go home, right? And he goes home, and notice that he tries to reject his sonship. He says, Father, I know that I've sinned. Let me be an indentured servant, right? He wants to work for his father's gifts. He doesn't want to receive them from his father's generosity. He wants to earn them, right? He wants to work for what his father would give him for free anyway, and does give him for free anyway. The second son, ironically, is even worse, because what the second son does is he also rejects his sonship. He says, Father, I have served you all these years, and you've never given me even a goat to feed my friends, right? And the word that he uses in Greek is even stronger, because while the younger son says in Greek, Father, let me be a hired servant, the elder son, who never leaves, uses a verb that describes slavery. He puts himself on a rung even below that younger son. He says, Father, all these years I have slaved for you, right? And he seems to resent the relationship with his father because he describes what his father does and how he treats him as orders, right? He says, I've never disobeyed any of your orders, right? The father doesn't seem like anybody who would order his sons to do anything. At no point in the parable does he order anything. But the elder son denies his sonship too. He says, I've slaved for you, and you've ordered me around, and I've never disobeyed you. Neither son wants to be a son. Neither son wants to receive freely the generosity of their father. And they do something rather interesting and rather tricky, right? Both sons want to base their identity on their activity, right? So who they are based upon what they have done. So the younger son returns to the father, and he says, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against earth, right? I have done this. This is my activity. I have sinned against heaven and against earth. And then he makes a statement of identity. He says, I no longer deserve to be called your son, right? He bases his identity on what he has done, his activity. And the father turns it on him, right? He doesn't even actually let the son finish his explanation, right? The explanation that he practices beforehand is actually longer than what he says to the father. The father cuts him off and just ignores what he's saying and goes to the servants and says, go give him the robe, give him the ring. He ignores everything that he's saying, and the father flips it around. He says we have to celebrate with a feast because this son of mine, right? He justifies it not with any activity. He doesn't justify anything based upon what the son has done, but on his identity, right? He says, this son of mine was dead and has come to life again. Therefore, let us celebrate. He doesn't allow the son to explain his identity based upon his activity. But he flips it. He says, no. My activity, what I'm doing, is based upon who you are, this son of mine. The elder son does the same exact thing, right? He describes his activity and therefore what he deserves. He says, I have slaved for you, right? I've never disobeyed you. And yet, you've never given me even a young goat, not to feast on with his father, right? Not to celebrate at home, to feast on with my friends. He desires the same thing that the younger son desired. He wants to go off and take his father's goods and hang out with his own friends, right? He essentially leaves home without ever leaving home. He denies his sonship by thinking of what he does in his father's home as slavery. And the father, again, very, very carefully flips it around and never accepts any justification based upon the elder son's activity. But he goes right to his identity. He says, my son, right? Identity, my son, you are here with me always. And then, right, the result, everything I have is yours, right? His activity, his generosity is based on the identity of the son. He says, my son, you're with me always. The parable of the prodigal son is about a prodigal father, I think, and two sons who don't want to be sons, right? And the father has to continually teach them by his generosity and by his joy how to be his sons. He has to continually remind them of their identity, right? You are my sons. You don't have to earn anything. You don't have to do anything. I'm not looking for any activity. I'm looking at your identity. You're my sons. I want to rejoice in you. And if we look at why Jesus tells this parable in the first place, it's because the Pharisees and the scribes want to judge other people based not upon their identity, but upon their activity, right? It says, tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to listen to Jesus. But the Pharisees and scribes began to complain, saying, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them, right? They're making a judgment. They're saying these people, what they've done, their activity, makes them unworthy, their identity, right? They're basing their identity on their activity. They have sinned. They are unworthy, right? And Christ flips it on them. He says, no. They are, right? Their identity is beloved sons and daughters of God. And God seeks them out as a lost sheep, as a lost coin, as a lost son. And that the word that rings, right, continually throughout these three parables is rejoice. That the conclusion of every single parable is that the father figure or the shepherd figure says rejoice, right? The shepherd says, rejoice with me because I have found my lost sheep. The woman who finds the coin says, rejoice with me because I have found the coin that I lost. And the father says to both of the sons, rejoice with me. Right? He says to the younger son, then let us celebrate with a feast because this son of mine has come home. He says to the elder son, but now we must celebrate and rejoice because your brother was dead. Right? I suggest that I think the primary and the most obvious, and it should be the most superficial in the best sense, right? What everyone sees first. The primary Christian virtue should be joy, right? that God, for all eternity, is perfectly blessed in himself, and out of freedom creates other beings, and essentially says, rejoice with me, right? The joy that I have for all eternity in my Son and in my Spirit, I want you to share in. Rejoice with me. Right? And every church, every Christian community is people who join together and say, rejoice with me, right? Because I was dead and I have come to life again. I was lost and I have been found. Right? And so joy is like, it's like the butter that sits on the top of the milk, right? Like joy should be the product, that which sits on the top of every Christian community. And all evangelization, all outreach, right? Whenever we go to share the gospel, it should always be rejoice with me, right? Come in and meet these people who come together every Sunday and rejoice because of who they are and because of who he is. Right? The prodigal son teaches his sons how to be sons by the joy that he finds in them. Right? At this Mass, in our prayer, in our daily lives, let's allow our Lord, right, to teach us how to be sons and daughters by the joy that he finds in us, right? And to find our joy not in anything that we've done or that we haven't done, but in who we are, right? His sons and daughters. To rejoice in our identity and to rejoice in the Father who finds joy in who we are.